Okay, last little bit, guys. So the Mughal Empire really expanded and grew under Abu Akbar's leadership, and by all accounts, he was a pretty decent leader. I mean, yes, he went to war fairly frequently, and yeah, there were the usual atrocities that tended to happen. But generally speaking, in comparison to a number of other leaders that we're going to look at here, Abu Akbar, kind of a cool dude. There's also an excellent movie about him on Netflix right now. It is a Bollywood film, so if you enjoy Indian cinema, and I definitely encourage you to check it out, it is a movie called Jodha Akbar. It is, of course, in Hindi, but you can deal with it. There are subtitles. It involves elephants and warfare and like Bollywood musical numbers and really beautiful costumes. Totally recommend it. You should watch it. I'm going to write it down in your instructions that it's something you should watch. So, at any rate, the Mughal Empire. So, the Mughal Empire is really famous for its architecture and its artistic production. The Mughal Empire really kind of glommed on to portraiture in particular. There's a lot of portraits of Mughal emperors and of their wives and of children. And they kind of blend European as well as Persian and Indian and other forms of Muslim art and decoration together into what they're doing. It's really interesting. They blend stuff together. However, after the death of Abu Akbar, subsequent leaders were not nearly as judicious or as wise in the leadership of the empire. His son, in particular, spent really, really heavily, largely because he had a substance abuse problem and wasn't a very good leader for much of the time. He let his wife do most of the ruling, and she was slightly evil. She kind of overspent the budget on a huge level. Subsequent leaders also tried to conquer the rest of India as a way to show their power over the actual territory. And as they conquered territory, they wanted to build stuff, including things like the Taj Mahal and various forts and mosques as a way to establish their leadership. All of these actions led to massive debt and to an increase in taxes. And Abu Akbar's rather progressive tax system, which had, prevented the penalization of poverty, went out the window. So taxes started to get heavier and heavier the longer the Mughal Empire lasted. And they stopped targeting the wealthy to pay most of the taxes and instead started targeting poorer populations, which is, of course, a really great way to make sure that people don't like you very much. Additionally, subsequent emperors didn't invest very much in terms of agriculture. They didn't build up infrastructure like roads or dams or bridges. They didn't invest in irrigation. They didn't investigate new crops or new techniques in farming. And that meant that while the population of India was growing, the food supply was staying static, and that led to widespread famine. So if you want to make people angry, tax them extremely heavily and then starve them on top of it. So that was not real great. And then the final nail in the coffin was a leader by the name of Aurangzeb. So Aurangzeb was one of Abu Akbar's great grandsons. And he came to power because he was convinced he was a religious fanatic. He was deeply, deeply conservative, very, very, very religious, and he believed that the Mughal Empire was experiencing all of the problems that it was, what with the famines and the debt and the uprisings, because it was being too tolerant of non-Muslim populations. And his older brother was set to take the throne, and his older brother was pretty religiously tolerant, and Aurangzeb thought that that was a sin, and so assassinated his older brother and his nephew. I didn't include that in the notes, but that's true. His nephew was 2, by the way, and then imprisoned his father for the rest of his life, and seized control of the throne. And when he seized control of the throne, he basically put into play a number of policies that were meant to kind of quote unquote purify the Mughal Empire. And so he was very not religiously tolerant. He was deeply intolerant. He believed that the reason that the Mughal Empire was in decline was because of its lax sort of enforcement of religious principles. So he outlawed drinking, he outlawed prostitution, he outlawed music. It was illegal to own musical instruments. He had them burnt. He had all construction of any Hindu buildings halted, including things like temples or burial sites. And he had existing Hindu temples torn down. All of that, as you might imagine, made him not very popular with Hindu populations. And then he reinstated the tax on non-Muslims, which was really high. So if you were Hindu or Christian or Jewish, and there were Hindus and Christians and Jews all in India, and they all got slapped with an even heavier tax, even though the tax rates were already high for the poor. So, as a result of this, Hindu communities began to openly revolt against the Mughals. In particular, they lost control of an important western region called Rajputana. They also lost control of a territory that was controlled by another rival religious group called the Sikhs. They lost control of territories in the far south of India. And this basically left the Mughals with an empire in name only. They maintained control over their capital city of Delhi, but they didn't have control of much else. And that's going to set India up for conquest by the British. So that's where we're going to end for today. Tomorrow we're going further to the east, and I want to talk about absolutism in Japan and absolutism in China. And then we will move on to the scientific revolution and the Enlightenment.